My name is Cheryl Graeve. I'm with the National Institute for Civil Discourse, and I work a program director and a national organizer for them. I've had some experience in working with Congress and in working at the National League of Women Voters. So kind of civic work, democracy building, and relationship trust building kind of work has been part of my heart. And I'm going to let my colleagues introduce themselves to you today also. And then I'm going to come back and I will share also deeper sort of what calls me to this work. But I'm going to invite Jack and Cynthia to go ahead and introduce themselves and also answer that question as we gather. Jack.
Good to be here with you all. My name is Jack Thomas. I'm kind of calling from Washington, D.C., where I grew up, and so the specter of national politics and dysfunction has loomed large and, in the 21st century, unfortunately. And I feel called to this. I'm also with the National Institute for Civil Discourse with Cheryl and do lots of our policy research and congressional engagement and get to work alongside everyday Americans who take that step towards civic action and engaging Congress in a substantive and positive and bipartisan way, and really love that opportunity. And so glad to be here with all of you. And I came to this work because I saw the scale of the problem that polarization and that dysfunction in the legislative branch is causing in our country. And yet I saw really excellent, inspired, passionate people on a mission to make it better. And that gave me the purpose and the opportunity to say, I want to follow their stead and I want to learn from people doing the same. So I get to learn from all of you. I get to learn from folks like Cheryl at NICD, and it's just been the joy of a lifetime to begin my career doing this work.
Thank you. Cynthia.
Thanks, Cheryl. Thanks, Jack. I'm just an ordinary resident of California. We lived in San Diego for many years after leaving DC, my husband and I. When I retired, came to San Diego. Now we live in a retirement community up in Carlsbad. So that's why I'm in Carlsbad. I have never done anything about politics or with politics. I was a lawyer in my career and then finished up my career as a peace builder. I got a PhD in conflict analysis and resolution outside of DC because I felt called to find a way to solve problems that wasn't I win, you lose. And it was really fulfilling work. And then retired and moved out here and wasn't doing anything. COVID hit. We thought, wow, we're really bored. What are we going to do about that? And we saw CommonSense American come through, and we joined CommonSense American. We also joined Braver Angels at the same time because we felt both of these things were calling our peace-building selves and our desire to make our country work again. I was working internationally, and now I want to work with my country. And though I never was anything political at all, maybe that was the right background for me. Working with Jack and Cheryl and the other folks at Keith at CommonSense American, I've had the chance to participate in answering these surveys, and then, as the California State Ambassador, take all of the results that Jack compiles and we figure out that we really don't disagree so much when you just get down and ask us the right questions, and reporting that back to Congress and saying, you want to know what your people think, your voters, the people put you in office? Here's what they think. And we're so well received, and I'm really looking forward to being involved in this year's briefing, which is on immigration, which will be amazing, sure, because this is a terrific organization.
Thank you, Cynthia. Yeah, and we'll get into a little bit more depth on CommonSense American and its process as one of the NICD programs. And then as part of the agenda, we'll go a little more deeply into the immigration issue. We are just about to launch that as an issue brief talk a little bit more about that. And then we'll conclude at the end with an opportunity to learn a little bit more about the kind of role like that Cynthia plays, or other, sort of opportunities that you could have if you're interested. And I know this group is filled with activity, does a lot of work for our country, for our communities as civic activists. So we will welcome you to whatever time you want or interest you have with CommonSense American. But let me start with Jack. If you could help launch a poll, I'd just like to ask you all a couple of questions, have you weigh in on a couple simple questions with us here. If you can see, got two questions. How important is it to you that Congress hears the voice of everyday Americans? So if you could just choose one of those. And then the second question is, how often do you think members of Congress or their staff really hear the perspectives of everyday Americans? So we'll just give you a minute or so to weigh in on these. There we go. Good. Give it maybe another couple of seconds here, and then we'll close the poll. Okay. Jack, yeah, good. Thank you for closing the poll. So how important, so we'll just look quickly here at how important it is to this group that Congress hears the voice of everyday Americans. And we see, no surprise, 91% think it's very important and 9% think it's important. So we are on the side of, yes, Congress should hear the voice of everyday Americans. And then as you look at how often do you think members of Congress really hear the perspective of everyday Americans? Yeah, we have, the biggest preponderance, about 71% say occasionally. Yeah, I think that's right. And then regularly, about 19%, and frequently 10%. And so I'm glad to see people don't think they never hear, but I agree with you. I think that, it's probably more in the arena of occasionally. And it is one of the things that we'll talk a little bit more about CommonSense American, because we do really bring the voice of everyday Americans into Congress. So with that, let me just share with you just a couple of slides quickly. Let's see if that stuff that's showing up for folks. Okay, that's us. And we'll share this PowerPoint with Marianne and Melanie and the team, so you can have it if you want. It's just, there's just a few slides. So, so that's us. Oh, here we go. I'm going to, my slide moves. There we go. Tell you just quickly about the National Institute for Civil Discourse. We were one of the very early bridge building civil discourse organizations in the country. Our executive director likes to laugh, oh, we started about 15 years ago, and things have gotten better. Huh? Yeah, we chuckle it. Unfortunately, things have not, but the National Institute was created by the University of Arizona in 2011 after the tragic shooting of Congresswoman Gabby Giffords. She was doing one of those wonderful civic programs called Congress on Your Corner. She was out in the public, and she and I believe 12 or 13 others were injured or killed in this tragic shooting. So she had been talking even before this, though, about the fact that there was fracturing in Congress, fracturing in the country. That is one of the things, frankly, that actually called me to work with NICD, was this fracturing of trust. And so she was trying to get some of that started in early conversations with the University of Arizona. And then after she was shot, everybody just moved very quickly to start the Institute. We have part of that early beginning was enlisting a highly respected bipartisan board You can see former President Bush, former President Clinton were our founding co-chairs. And we have always maintained a bipartisan, very rigorous, thorough, thoughtful, bipartisan orientation. So we bring on leaders and board members who fit that bill. You can see here two former Senate Majority Leaders, Senator Tom Daschle on the left, Senator Trent Lott on the right, and a former governor and a former cabinet member, Christy Todd Whitman, our current co-chairs. And we'll share with you a link to the website. You can see our host of very highly respected leaders, national leaders. NICD has a few programs. And under each of these programs, we have different activities or training or research. CommonSense American, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute, which we've been mentioning, is one of those. The National Institute has, since its beginning, a state legislative program. Jack is deeply involved in that program as well. They take state legislators and offer training to state legislatures on sort of civil discourse, bridge building, policy making across difference. And the beautiful thing is state legislators or former state legislators are trained and serve as facilitators of these trainings along with staff like Jack and our wonderful colleague, Tom Little. And, I've been in those rooms when the real magic happens, when policymakers get a chance to meet each other without the veil or the divisions of politics, where they have a safe space in which to connect and understand what calls them forward. And then they get to the practice and design ways that they want to work together going forward after the training. So those are just fantastic programs. And if anybody has an interest, Jack will loop back at the end. Jack can say more. We have a research network. I think over 60 professors and academics from different colleges and universities around the country who make up our research network. On the website, you can see a link to all those experts and their areas of expertise in bridge building, depolarization, some of them on some of our other sort of democracy area work like, redistricting and money in politics and things that are known to league members and of interest. We have an Engaging Differences program. It's the one I'm most deeply involved with, as well as CommonSense American. That has several layers to the Engaging Differences program. We have been working. We've got some tools online out of that program. I work with other partners around the country who are also bridge building as part of that work, and we share and amplify each other's work. And then we've got a new element to Engaging Differences, which is our executive director, Keith Allred, is doing a program for the University of Arizona, which will be offered online, an online course. So we're really excited about that. And then as part of kind of Engaging Differences and coming out of our Golden Rule 2020, we worked with faith leaders to ask them or invite them into some of the kind of depolarization, bridge building, civil discourse work. And we've been working with governors and the Disagree Better initiative, which is something some of you may also know about, to hold bipartisan events, conversations with governors across Republicans and Democrats across difference, and as well as faith leaders of different backgrounds and experiences. So we look there at something like the Golden Rule, which is how we'd like to treat each other and show up with respect. for each other across our differences. Going to, and then before, we get into a little bit more depth on our CSA project, one of the things we found as an institute, and one of the things that sort of guides CommonSense American, is a sense as we looked at polarization around the country, and over the last couple of decades, really, there's a couple of types of polarization, which many of you who are braver angels have heard this probably before as well. But we have issues polarization, so the distance between Republicans and Democrats, and social polarization or affective polarization, which is how much animosity we feel toward each other. And as we look, with political leaders, that issue polarization as well as that social polarization is at the highest historically we've seen, and rising, continues to rise. And then as we look at citizens, among the very politically active citizens, issue polarization and social polarization are also at that highest ever level and rising. But among everyday Americans, so those not as quite as civically or politically active, we found that the social polarization is high. We've got algorithms, our social media, the traditional media feeds us all of the division diet, right? But when we actually look at everyday Americans, and as they look at issues together in an informed way, and they get the best case for and against those issues, actually that polarization is low and slowly rising. So that is that's a place of real promise that we found, and that really CommonSense American it helps lift that voice of everyday Americans. And as we look kind of at the strategy for CommonSense American, and we engage Congress in the results, we look at the sort of center of power is focused on the few that are really sitting in the center. And because Congress is so almost equally divided, really 50-50, goes back and forth, swings a little here and there between our last number of elections, that center really has an outsized power. So they have the ability to form, and our executive director talks about really the center of policy making over the last decade, maybe, has been really those bipartisan members, as opposed to even the White House or the Speaker's office or the Senate Majority Leader. So anyway, this is part of the nucleus for why CommonSense American exists, and why it's been effective. So actually, Jack, before we start, I'll do a little video, talk a little bit more about CSA specifically. But before I do, I just want to see if there's a quick question or two that folks have, just generally NICD or our programs. And if you don't have one now, fine. We can type. Yeah.
There is a question from Diane about who funds these endeavors in NICD.
Good question, and thank you for surfacing it, Marianne. I don't always catch all the stuff that comes in the chat. Our funding mainly comes from foundations, and then we have some individual, major donors and individual small donors. So that's where the resources come, basically. Even though we're affiliated with the University of Arizona, that's not, they don't fund us. So yeah. Good question. Anybody else? Okay.
You mentioned, I had a question.
Sure.
You mentioned that NICD has a training for congressional representatives. What kind of participation do our members of Congress have in those trainings?
Yeah, Bria, we really have a training more for the state legislative leaders in state legislatures. We have done a little bit of work now and again with Congress over the years since I've been there, a session here or there. But I think we found, because state legislatures are a feeder to Congress, it's our hope that we train them there, and and then they can go on to understand a little bit more how to be respectful leaders in Congress. I don't know if Jack, if you have anything you want to add on the state ledge training.
Yeah, there's, nearly 7,000 state legislators in the United States right now. And so we interact with hundreds every year and put on these trainings. And even if they don't go on to Congress, uh, and, don't become kind of part of the farm system, as some people call it, for national politics, we really see the value in working with them to deliver more collaborative, more civil state legislatures across the country. I think they see the value in it too, because unfortunately, polarization at the federal level, at the national level, is starting to trickle down into the states, and it's becoming more of an issue. And so we're there to kind of help equip them with the tools they need to confront the magnitude of this challenge.
Yeah, thank you. I think with that, why don't we just take a couple more minutes? I want to share with you a little bit more about CommonSense American, start with a video, and then we'll move into Jack telling you a little bit about the issue that we've selected for this year, immigration.
CommonSense American is made up of everyday citizens from across the country.
We're such a diverse group of folks with different backgrounds and different party affiliations.
When your voice is added to so many thousands of other voices, we become very powerful.
It's been successful multiple times now.
Your commitment to bipartisanship is forging solutions to the challenges our nation faces.
It's a great way to come together and work with other people and solve problems that affect the country.
What makes me most proud of being a member, an engaged member of CommonSense American is the results.
We identify points of agreement by gathering feedback from Republicans, Democrats, and independents.
Our voice is being heard, and our voice is being accepted, and our voice is having an impact.
Your work to identify and advocate for important bipartisan bills has already made a difference.
There's been 3 issues that we have looked at, and in all 3 cases, we have succeeded.
There are many challenges in front of us, and I look forward to working with you to identify and advance solutions for the American people. Really, to put it bluntly, we need your help.
This is the real deal. Thank you for supporting our efforts.
Thank you, Jack. And some of you may recognize Martha Cox, our beloved friend, who's also a League member and a CSA member. And that video is a little dated because we are actually now 4 for 4. But let me tell you just quickly, a little bit more about, come on. There we go. CommonSense American has about almost 90,000 members. It's pretty, and the really wonderful, remarkable thing is it's comprised of about 25%, sometimes it's 24, 26% Democrat, about 25% Republican. Again, that goes up or down by a point or two, but then 45% independent. So we really are made up of the political sort of orientation of the country. We have developed a 4-part process where we identify an issue that offers bipartisan promise, and our members weigh in. We usually send a list of about 10 or 12 issues. They weigh in on the issue they think offers the best bipartisan promise. We talk to members of Congress and experts and gather a pool of information that then comes forth to identify one issue. That around that issue, we develop an issue brief, which is just, I just love this. And as leaguers, we study stuff. This provides the best case for and the best case against a particular policy area. So people are informed as they before they get to weigh in. And then we invite members to weigh in on that issue based on what they've read out of the brief. And it's online, it's easy to do. There's a thoughtful, it takes maybe about an hour, hour and a half to go through the brief and to weigh in. And then once we have the results back from members, we take those results to Congress and we brief and engage members of Congress. And the image that you see to the right there of that 4-part process just shows you we create a website with the member results. And then that's part of the way that we share the information with Congress. And you can see there that particular issue we worked on Workforce Pell. And with this population, 25, 25, 45, 89% of those members had similar common ground response. And so we've found just without exception, the issues that we work on carry 70, 80, 90% common agreement on particular areas. So that is a little bit about, and you'll hear a little bit from Cynthia in a bit about sort of that process of engaging Congress. I'm going to start with Jack, who's been engaging Congress as we've chosen this particular issue. So Jack, take it away.
Thank you, Cheryl. And again, good to be here with you all. I'll start with Ellen, your question, which is a great segue into kind of what's coming up on this issue, which is, what are the previous issues we've succeeded on? So we are now 4 for 4, as Cheryl mentioned. The video is recently out of date, but we have worked previously on ending surprise medical billing that passed Congress through the No Surprises Act. Then after that, we worked on physical infrastructure, something that passed through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. And then we worked on electoral count reform with the Electoral Count Reform Act. And then most recently, we worked on career-connected learning, supporting career and technical education, and that passed through Workforce Pell's portion of the bigger kind of reconciliation bill that passed last summer. So we're 4 for 4 in demonstrating everyday Americans' thoughts in Congress and their alignment and their agreement and how that crosses ideological and partisan boundaries. We got pretty proud of being 4 for 4. We thought, hey, we didn't think we could swing 1,000% and swing 1,000 in Congress at the federal level. So, what's something really impactful that we could have? And as we started that analysis, we started to consider, like Cheryl said, where is the real center of American policymaking? And on our 4 issues that have succeeded and on a few others that have made really big headlines for being bipartisan and successful endeavors to kind of forge better policy in America, we saw how important and how central that group of bipartisan senators in the Senate was, and recognizing that strength that they have to say, we're going to stand up and check the worst excesses of our own parties at either end of the ideological extreme, and we're going to try to work together. And so, seeing that strength and seeing their incredible record of success, we realized that they had an impactful role that they could continue to play in American politics. And when, we had some very notable moderates and bipartisan members of the Senate leaving at the end of 2024 with Kyrsten Sinema and Mitt Romney and Joe Manchin, we really thought that was work that ought to continue despite the maybe diminishing numbers of some of the core members of that group. So we kind of got a little bit out of our lane and thought, how can CommonSense American, help in this effort? Because so many of our members are deeply committed to engaging Congress on active policy issues, finding where there's agreement and saying, can't we do something better out of this? Can't we not let dysfunction win the day? So we did. And we, along with our members, consulted Congress and said, where are the issues with the strongest areas of bipartisan agreement like we normally do? And we came to find that if there's a chance of promising, success on this issue, overwhelmingly, both members of Congress and our members thought we ought to choose immigration. That is somewhere that we could really use good, smart policy on that we've been neglecting for a long time. And there's surprisingly a bipartisan agreement that can be had. And so we've been working really hard on writing that brief. we're working with that core group in the Senate, but we've expanded it and strengthened it in one key way that I want to mention too. And that there's a famous phrase in Congress, I'm sure some of you have heard it, that the other party is the opposition, but the other chamber is the enemy. And in our 4 legislative victories that we've achieved, we found that to be the case, that, we had achieved bipartisan consensus on the policy within the Senate and within the House, but they each had their own version of the bill that they wanted to succeed for kind of sometimes just territorial reasons. And that disagreement almost killed successful bipartisan legislation. And so we thought that the work of the CommonSense Coalition, as it's called in the Senate, was worth strengthening, worth supporting, and that it ought to include members of the House as well, because they're in a very closely divided chamber. I think at this point, depending on the day, the House actually has fewer members in the majority party compared to the minority party than the Senate does, somewhere with, a fourth of the membership of the House. So recognizing that narrow partisan divide, we really thought that, together across both chambers, you could really get something successful done on legislation. So we've been working very hard on immigration. We've been going through our usual process of writing the strongest arguments for and against, each of the active legislative proposals on immigration reform in the United States, and recognizing that this is a, incredibly complex and incredibly polarizing topic. We've been working with some of the best subject matter experts in the entire country. We've been working with worldwide renowned immigration economists. We've been working with subject matter experts who have worked within government, outside of government, on behalf of immigration lawyers, on behalf of immigration attorneys themselves and their representation organizations as well. And they don't cheat either direction. They're ideologically balanced, and so they really live the mission of what we do. And so as we've been writing this, we've had wonderful help and wonderful assortment of experts who can help, consult us on understanding the policy issue while also making sure we can explain it to all of our members as well in a really comprehensive and understandable way. So there are 3 kind of big buckets of policy that I want to kind of explain real quick of what that brief will look like. I know immigration is in the headlines constantly, but it's also being talked about in Congress consistently too. And so when they talk about it, we don't want to restart the whole wheel and say, well, we're going to reinvent immigration policy, because there have been so many efforts to try to get this done in a bipartisan way that we can often adopt some of the frameworks that they've had to. But if we think about writing this policy brief that accurately reflects what's going on in Congress, we have kind of 3 big buckets that we're formulating things into. The first of which is effective fences, right? So many Americans want to have an immigration system that is effective at keeping people out that we don't want to come in. If someone poses a threat to the United States, or they don't fit the profile of someone that would come and work and contribute to our country, then we ought to have a system that is able and effective in making sure that they don't enter in an unauthorized way, or they don't enter illegally, or bring people in that we wouldn't want to admit to the United States. And that's a really important part of that. So that sometimes is thought of as border security, but it's also just making sure that we can improve and efficiently get people through our immigration system so that they don't fall through the cracks. Having a modern, effective, efficient immigration system is aligned with the goals of security and making sure that the United States is safe and prosperous. So that's kind of an effective fences way, but we also think about effective gates, that when we bring people in, it ought to be for ways that improve the United States, whether they want to come and just temporarily work and help in our agricultural industry and our seafood industry, if they want to do seasonal employment, that we have the pathways that allow them to come contribute to our economy and to our culture, while also making sure that they have the opportunities to improve their own lives through working and living here as well. So effective gates, those are legal pathways. You might hear about the H-1B visa or the H-2A visas. There are scores of visas, that some of which I can't even wrap my head around all the time, but they provide the kind of second bucket of how we can get people into the country efficiently, and especially those that would really want to help contribute and bring their expertise and their brains and their wonderful contributions to who America is. And then the third bucket is those who are already here. There's an increasing bipartisan recognition that the estimated 14 million people who are currently in the United States without status, maybe they had a visa at one point and no longer are eligible for that visa, or they're no longer in status, or they crossed over the border and are undocumented. you really have to do something with them. And choosing to ignore that group of people has just a whole host of policy trade-offs that I think very few people want to actually make. And they really do want to confront, how can we give these people status, or how can we confront the problem of 14 million people who live in this country in some kind of legal um, area of ill-defined nature. And so we want to really make sure that as part of that is as much as that's part of the active immigration debate, we want to make sure our members have the chance to weigh in on it too, because there are legitimate policy trade-offs and considerations that have to be made with when confronting that population and trying to understand morally and from a policy perspective, what should we do about that group of people. So those are the three big buckets that are incorporated in our brief. We have a really long policy brief, but our goal is to get it that you, everyday American, could understand it, read it, and weigh in on each of the policy considerations in about an hour. So it might take you more. It will definitely take me more to read it, to really parse it through. But it'll give you that opportunity to weigh in on active legislative debates. And we focus on those active legislative debates because it gives everyday Americans incredible power. We get to go to Congress to say, these are the things you still haven't figured out bipartisan agreement on. And here's what everyday Americans think when they have the time and the chance to get informed on this debate alongside you. Cynthia has joined us on many of the briefings. California is not hurting for congressional offices to brief. So Cynthia joined me. I joined her in many, many dozens of these briefings. And the power of being able to demonstrate what an everyday American thinks about an issue, not from a political advocacy perspective, not from an issue advocacy perspective, but from just the goal of trying to better inform congressional debates and help Congress come to bipartisan agreement, has been really impactful to see. I think I won't speak for Cynthia, but in California, there's just an amazing assortment of people who are civically minded, engaged, and who want to help Congress do its job better. I saw the characterizations of dysfunctional and isolated and how often we think Congress listens to the American people. And I think our organization and I think these issue briefs give a powerful opportunity to do that and to weigh in. So before talking, back generally about CommonSense American and weighing in and interacting with Congress, does anyone have any questions about our immigration brief or how we do this policy research that I can help answer?
If so, go
Yeah,
ahead.
you might want to look at the chat. There's some questions there.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for helping me surface those. Is there a document we can access? I'm seeing Marie Ann, your question. Absolutely. So that issue brief, we are hard at work. In fact, our executive director, Keith, is working on it literally as I speak. So we're hoping to release that in mid-March, and we're going to send an email out to every CommonSense American member, anyone who's signed up on our website, commonsenseamerican.org. They'll get an email inviting them to fill out the brief. And as soon as we have 1,000 responses across the country, that's kind of when we know that the responses are statistically significant, that they represent Americans across the political spectrum and aren't going to change too much as more people weigh in. As soon as we have that, we will start briefing congressional offices. We'll meet with senior staff in those offices to say, here's what everyday Americans think. And often those senior staff then have the job of briefing their boss before they vote on this issue. So we really get an unparalleled level of access in the policy process. And we don't put our thumb on the scale. We're not taking a position on the legislation. So we let our members do all the talking, and their voices are really what shines through to Congress. Diane, yeah.
Hi, thank you for this. I have a question about, on the third point, those who are already here. Yeah. Does the brief address things like asylum is a right? It's to request asylum, or refugees, for example, can't come into the country until they've gone through a whole process. And also that, look at my thing here, due process needs to be honored when people apply. They have a I would always say a pathway, if you would. We're seeing, for example, refugee status being now denied. That has already been granted. So, and that these are human beings. I mean, yes, I agree with you on your first point. The effect of borders is effective. I think it's borders you said, or fences, is really important. And I think that needs to be honored. But at the same time, for those people that are coming in or have been here, as you addressed, there are due process is being denied. I know this because in our area, we have an immigration court. And so we see what is happening in our county and what kinds of things are happening. Is this being addressed within your brief about how to respect due process, that asylum seekers have a right to seek asylum, that refugees get vetted before they ever come into this country. They have to go through a whole process, and that those people that are seeking asylum or are refugees are human beings. They are being addressed as not other than not a human being.
Yeah, they're really excellent questions, Diane. And I have the pleasure of actually kind of being our lead staffer on asylum reform and what we can do about that. So to take a complex issue, and I totally agree. Yes, we are tackling those topics. That is something we focus on. I learned very early in the process about the United States' non-refoulement obligations, which is a UN treaty that we signed to say, people who come here who don't have a safe place that they can be from, or they're facing persecution in their countries, we are obligated to provide them the process to investigate, are you eligible for asylum, and could you, have work authorization and permanent status in the United States as a result of that asylum or refugee status. So absolutely, we pretty thoroughly and as few words as we can explain it, cover that and say, here are the obligations we have, here are the obligations we have historically had, and here are some of the debates about how we can make that process either more efficient or, just more stringent, as some people might argue for, or more open, as some people might argue for. We're going to kind of cover both ends of that spectrum on the kind of stringency and efficiency of that. But yeah, we really do start with the understanding that, these are people who come to the United States, and we talk about the kind of 14 million people who are already here. We get into this as well there, that, our picture of who this might be in our heads might not always be accurate. And so we kind of paint a little bit of that picture saying this is a human being, but very often this is someone that's been here for decades and worked and has paid taxes, and many of them have started families in America. So really not letting that go to the wayside is an important issue in our brief, and we're still at the same time surfacing those active legislative debates too. Those are all really good questions.
And are you including, because we've done a webinar on this, the economic impact that they bring to the country, the different kinds of innovations that they bring, the businesses that they bring. And now talk to people in your community who are looking for people to do contracting work or to do work in gardening, whatever. It's gone, as you know. So we've lost a really huge, large worker base. And I just had one thing and then I'm signing off. I sat in on the governor's conference this week listening to it. And one of the things that came out in there, Luntz did a survey. The American people trust their local and state governments. They don't trust the federal government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's, all politics is local, and as polarization increases, I think we're finding that to be true, that trust remains local too. I won't spend too long on this, but I completely agree, Diane, and we actually, that's what two of those world-renowned immigration economists are helping us do, is chart out the economic impact of this and say, what are these immigrants contributing to their communities, to their local governments, to their state governments, and kind of can we quantify for people who are really economically minded the impact that they bring to this country, and kind of how that impacts us and our economy too. Nina, I'm seeing your question. Yes, we do have to be members, and Cheryl, I appreciate you taking the ones in the chat as well. So I'll open it up if anyone has anything they'd like to ask verbally. I see, Melanie, your question on CSA's reputation with members of Congress and what kind of influence what kind of influence we have. The good news is our good work has earned us a better reputation, and that reputation has earned us the opportunity to do more good work. So as we work with this Common Sense Coalition in the House and the Senate, we really are at the center of American policymaking. We see that group of bipartisan legislators as driving a lot of the major pieces of legislation. I named 4 of the ones we've been successful on, but they've also been principally involved in getting the Safer Communities Act passed, which was kind of the major bipartisan gun control and gun safety legislation that was passed a few years ago. The Respect for Marriage Act, the Chips and Sciences Act, all of those came out of that core group of bipartisan legislators. And so now we are very closely involved in helping them hear from everyday Americans and bringing everyday Americans' thoughts to that process. So our reputation is quite strong because of the success we've had. But I think most importantly, and we always recognize this, is that our members do the talking. Like I said earlier, we don't take positions on legislation. So when we go to Congress, they can trust that what they're hearing is the informed thoughts of Americans. It's not just the people who had the time to pick up a phone and and talk to a junior staffer about the issue that's really important to them, but it's the people who read the arguments for something and the arguments against it who made that consideration on their own and took the time to share that with Congress as well. So because we don't take positions on legislation, because we let our members who are informed themselves really make that impact in Congress, we have a lot of trust with congressional offices. And that's why we are able so successfully to meet so broadly. Last issue, we met with 320 members of Congress out of the 535. So a majority of Congress heard from everyday Americans across the country on how they felt about career-connected learning. We're hoping and expecting that we can meet that number on immigration as well, even on a shorter timetable.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add quickly that that voice of everyday Americans, the difference between like advocating for an issue and advocating for what everyday Americans are telling members of Congress is just profound. I mean, I used to work in Congress as a staffer, and part of these briefings you'll hear just in a second from Cynthia about kind of that experience. But those offices say, oh my God, I've never, nobody's ever really given me this before. And they really appreciate it because it gives them some grounding upon which to say, well, here's what the public is thinking, and not a manipulated public, but an informed, bipartisan public. So multi-partisan, not just bipartisan.
Yeah. So I'll pass it off to Cynthia here to share a little bit more about kind of action opportunities, but I'll end, Cheryl, on that really good note that on our last issue, when we were working on career-connected learning, we went to share an early version of our results with the lead staffers negotiating the bipartisan piece of legislation that would soon be announced, and said, here's our members' thoughts on this issue. And they said, this is fantastic. We wish we would have had this sooner. And would you go back to your members and ask some more questions? We're actively debating and negotiating this final piece of legislation, and we think your members could help us sort out some key areas that we still don't have agreement on. And we did that, and our results were very closely reflected in the final bipartisan piece of legislation that was introduced. So there's just a small story of just how much trust there is in what our members think and how they react to some issues in Congress. And so it is the joy, like I said, the joy of a lifetime to do this work, and I appreciate you all having your good curiosity and questions about what we do, and I will pass it off to Cynthia to share more about how our members can have such that impact.
Thank you, Jack. And Diane, I'm so glad you're still here. I just sent you that chat because I didn't know if you were quickly leaving. But I want to encourage all of you, okay, this is the sales pitch, join CSA so that you can see this incredible brief that Jack and Keith and all the people who are doing the research. This is honestly, Jack, plug your ears, I don't need to blush, world-class research. This is some of the finest research that I have seen. And like I said, I've got a PhD, it's no big deal, but I've seen some good research. I know what qualifies and what doesn't. This does. They don't cut corners. They don't use biased information. They're looking at both sides, and then they make both arguments from both sides. And then they say to all the people, 90,000, wow, okay, read this, read these arguments. Which one do you agree with most? Which one do you disagree with most? Why? What would make you feel better about it? All those kinds of things. That's when Jack says this is an informed response, they mean it because, yeah, I'm sorry, I can't do it in an hour or an hour and a half either. It takes me a good 2 hours, and then I go back and look at it again. They do this amazing research, and then we have to really digest it and respond in thoughtful, useful ways. Then they take it and they do the statistical analysis so that the outcome is, I'm going to say trustworthy, but it's at least reflective of the situation and our collective perception of it. Truth, false, can't say, but it is reflective of the perception of the people who respond. And okay, that's my preaching. It's amazing. And then as the ambassador for California, that's what I was for the past couple of years or a year, or however long it's been. Now they got me some more help, so it won't be just me. Yay. but being able to brief the staff of my representatives. So when I talked to Scott Peters when I was living in San Diego, and I talked to these folks and they go, yeah, I'm one of the people who voted for you, or I was one of the people who voted against you. And you want to know what all the people who live in this district think? Well, here it is. Because I think, Jack and Cheryl, that the past briefs are available on the website, but you can go on and you can look at it. You can see how it breaks down, not just the big solid numbers, but all of the pieces that were underneath. Because in California, we have so many numbers, they can break us down by income, by, I don't know if it was gender, but race and neighborhood and things like that, what people said. And then the most remarkable outcome, 89% of us agree. And actually, that's not the most remarkable. Well, that's pretty remarkable. But the other remarkable part, in my view, was half of us thought that the other side would not agree with us. And so Jack's analysis includes that. So this is where we agreed. Wow, 89% of us. 50% of us thought the other people would disagree with us. And that shows us, that reflects back to us the polarization that we have. So what does all this tell me as a person who votes? But yeah, I'm not really very politically active, but I do care about the communities I'm living. And so I guess I am politically active now. I just have an outlet for it. And CSA is a marvelous outlet. And I came to it, like I said before, just because, you know, at the time it was COVID, I really didn't have anything to do. I thought, yeah, I can give this my attention, but wow, is it interesting? And wow, is it important? And I care about it. And they're all questions that I care about. And so I take the time to respond. And then I can talk to my neighbors and my friends or people I don't know and my political representatives, and I can say, yeah, and not only me, but all my neighbors and this percent of the people who live in your district. And they break it down by, so this was another thing that I saw a question pop up, and I can't probably give you the right answer, but Jack and Cheryl can. They make sure that the responses are not like if it's, how do I say this? Weighted. They have weighted answers so that it does reflect the genuine. You don't just have 3 Democrats and 25 Republicans responding and call them equal. The responses are weighted so we get a good reflection of the actual representation. I don't really have a lot more to say than that, other than I think you can tell that I'm really interested, and I really, really hope each of you participate in this. You don't have to do anything other than agree to take however much time it takes and you want to do it anyway, to participate by reading the brief and doing the survey. That's all you have to do. But then your voice actually gets counted. Your voice gets heard and your thoughts get used. And that's a very good feeling. One of the other things, I've got little notes here I'm supposed to be reading, which I forget to do. In case you want to join a congressional briefing, either I or one of the other California. There we go. You can let Cheryl know if you'd like to join one of the congressional briefings that I or one of the other ambassadors have. Because I'll tell you what, talking to those, the staff of our representatives, they listen to us and they're so grateful to hear from us. I never thought anybody would care what I had to say. But they do care. And we start a relationship with them, and they invite us to come back next time we have something more to say. And if they have questions, come back and ask us the questions. Like Jack said, they had a bunch of questions on one of the issues, and we, all of the members, got another survey to take to help get some clarification on those issues, and they took that into consideration. It's very validating in an arena where we feel like there's not many people paying attention to what's important to us. And serving as a volunteer ambassador or conversation facilitator. I'm not the very best one to talk about conversation facilitator because I haven't actually done that, but Cheryl and Jack can talk to you about it. There are lots of ways to be active and volunteer. So I know you all are very active as well and can probably really contribute to this, but I know you can contribute by reading that brief and finishing the survey. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Cynthia. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about, the CSA conversations, and it is bringing in the voice and perspective of the everyday Americans that really gives us a lot of credibility. And we have offered an opportunity after people read and weigh in on the issue brief to be part of a small group conversation. We've brought people together just in small groups with one facilitator. We're shifting that model a little bit to do that after sort of a national briefing or as part of a national briefing. But it's just a wonderful experience. People really love it, and they're surprised that we have as much common ground as we find as Cynthia mentioned. Marianne, I see your hand.
Yeah, my question is, what is the process that CommonSense American uses for getting all this input? Do they have polls or meetings, or how do you go about getting all of this feedback?
It's a good question, Marianne. We basically use email to send out a notice that the issue brief is ready for people to read and weigh in on. And then there's a form that goes along with reading the brief and allows people to weigh in. So it's all done virtually, electronically. As people weigh in, then that information is calculated and put on a results page, so that's what we end up sharing with Congress. But it's a pretty straightforward experience. It's online, and you're informed, and you get to vote, weigh in, as we call it, as you go through this issue brief. So, yeah.
And Melanie had a question earlier, asking how many perspectives or model legislation is offered for members to consider.
Yeah, that's a good question, Melanie. I think it's less in the model legislation and more in the kind of policy possibilities around the areas that we're studying. So, as Jack mentioned, there's three kind of big areas in immigration. So it's not necessarily model legislation, but it is the best case for a particular policy issue and the best case against it. And then you say, oh, after reading that, okay, here's where we stand. I don't know, Jack, if you have,
I completely agree, Cheryl. One, if it helps define it, one thing we did on our most recent brief on career-connected learning, we were considering, should the government extend the Pell Grant program to shorter-term career-connected learning training opportunities? So rather than only being able to use Pell Grants for college, could you use it to maybe become a pipe fitter or a welder? And you use that funding for the certification and education required to become a member of those trades or perform that job. So one of the complex considerations in that was, should we bar for-profit colleges and for-profit institutions from that funding? And if we should, or if we shouldn't, are there quality control measures that we can put in place to make sure that they're providing good education with federal dollars? Well, we put that to our members. And so there were about 7 quality control measures that we could enlist in that process. And each one we had a strong argument for and a strong argument against. And so, there was tangible policy that we asked people to consider, but each one individually was a kind of general policy consideration rather than its own bill or piece of legislation. But we did the full work to make sure that those considerations had their strongest arguments for and against them, because we really cared about giving accurate and effective data on that.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Sorry, you guys. I was just typing to send into the chat here a couple of links if you're interested in learning more about CSA, or as I see we're at time here, we want to respect your time. There's also a link to join if you're interested. Again, it's not like joining the league because it's a lower bar threshold to join. You just have to sign up, and but then to engage, thoughtfully, we do ask for an hour to 2 hours as you read that brief and weigh in thoughtfully. You read the best case for and against. So yeah, I guess I want to
Cheryl?
see. Yeah, go ahead, Cynthia.
I can't find how to raise my hand right now electronically, but I did want to respond. Diane asked me a question and I'm afraid I don't know the answer. How do we know when it's time for members to fill out the survey? Do we get an email, or what happens?
Yep, good question. You'll get an email from CommonSense American. So of course we encourage you to whitelist it if you join, but you'll get an email from us, and in that email it'll have a link that will take you to a web page that has the brief, the issue brief. And so yeah, that's how you know. And I know sometimes email gets into different tabs, promotions, other things rather than your main one. So I guess I encourage, you to look through each of your sort of email tabs. Yeah, because I know it doesn't always, sometimes it's disappointing if you miss the opportunity, but you won't. We will continue to communicate with people who are members. And if you've filled out the brief, then you know how these online systems, okay, Cheryl did the brief, don't remind her to fill out the brief again system. So that'll happen. But if you haven't filled out the brief, we'll send another one saying, hey, Cheryl, have you filled it out yet? Yeah. Are there any other questions? I know Cynthia and Jack and I might be able to stay for another few minutes, but also just, want to really thank you all for being with us, for being the kind of civic citizens that you are, and just encourage you to explore this. I mean, I will say, my league experience, my CSA experience, I hold both in high regard in my life. Having worked for a member of Congress myself, I've never seen the same kind of potent efficacy of my voice being, counted and then delivered to Congress in the way CSA does. I mean, it's effective, and these members of Congress, they get advocates on one side or the other. They get a lot of, general polling and stuff like this. They don't often get the voice of everyday Americans on an issue. And so that's what to me is profoundly important about this program. Right? Oh, I see some other ones.
Another question is from Ellen. How can we help you spread the word about this opportunity for regular people to have their voice listened to?
Yeah, thank you, Ellen. I think I put a link into the chat, maybe in a follow-up. I'm sending the recording to Marianne and team. Maybe in the follow-up note, Marianne, encourage people, if they're interested and want to, you can share the link to CommonSense American and encourage people to join, to simply click on that membership link and join.
Yeah, the link will be on the LWV Santa Clara County Civic Engagement website, and we will also send out that link in subsequent emails that you can share with your colleagues and other organizations. And I want to thank our presenters, Cheryl and Jack and Cynthia. This has been very enlightening, I think, for a lot of people. I got one person saying that they're sold. They will join CSA later today. So I think you're going to have a tiny boost in membership. So thank you again. And if there's anything else any of you want to add, I think some of us will be hanging in here to hear any more news here.
Thank you very much. You really add to the boost of morale for those of us that are trying to figure out what, if anything, we can do to be helpful. So this is just a wonderful presentation. Really grateful to you for all of your time and work.
Right back at you.